want to start out with an observation, again, that I hope nobody disagrees with, and that is that the data in your corporation is not neatly laid out like a map. That the data in your corporation is something that is, quite frankly, very disorganized. And so let's now talk about the data in your corporation. And I want to put a simple little diagram in front of you that if you go into corporations, you find out that there's really three kinds of data in the corporation. There's something called structured data, there's something called textual data, and there's something called analog or IoT data, Internet of Things data. So let's talk about each one of these types of data. And when you go into the corporation today, most people are familiar with and are used to seeing and talking about and working with structured data. What is structured data? Structured data is the data in your corporation that typically results from transactions. So if you were a bank, it would be every time somebody comes to put money in the bank or take money out of the bank. If you're a retailer, it's every time somebody comes and makes a purchase. If you're a telephone company, it's every time somebody makes a phone call. So that the data in your structured environment is something that repeats the same sort of thing over and over again. And the structure of the data, because it is repetitive, the structure of the data is something that is very uniform in terms of its content. Now let's go to textual data. What do we mean by textual data? Well, it turns out textual data is everywhere. We have textual data in email. We have textual data in call centers. We have textual data in contracts. We have textual data in memos. And if you look in the corporation, there are many, many places where we have textual data. Then the other kind of data we have in the corporation is something called the analog data or machine generated data. And if you're, say, a manufacturing shop, you've got a little electronic eyes sitting there gauging the rate at which products are manufactured. If you're a retailer, you typically have drones in the sky looking at the traffic going into a shopping center. So there's many, many forms of machine-generated data that are out there. Now, when we take a look at the volume of data, we find something kind of interesting. From a standpoint of a volume of data, the structured data is actually the least amount of data that we have in the corporation. Next to it is textual data, and we typically have a lot more textual data than we have structured data. And then we go to our analog or machine generated data, and we end up having lots and lots of machine generated data. So you can think of the proportional size of these pieces of data to look something like this. Now, these, pardon me, these ratios vary from corporation to corporation. Not all corporations will fit exactly the model we're showing here, but many corporations do. Now, when we take a look at where we make decisions in the corporation, the truth is that the most decisions that we make in the corporation are based on the smallest amount of data that we have. 95% of corporate decisions are based on 5% of the data. And we ask ourselves, gee, does this make any sense? Should we, as a corporation, be data driven and making our decisions based on just the structured data in the corporation? And you say, wait a minute, I'm probably missing something because I'm only looking at a small fraction of the. It would be like going into an election of the president of the United States, and only letting people that are over 70 years old vote. Does that make any sense? And the answer is no. Certainly, it doesn't make any sense to have such an election. So let's take a look at what we're missing. When you're only looking at structured data, what you're missing is something called your textual data. And what do we find in our textual data environment? The answer is we find a lot of really interesting information. Perhaps the most important and useful information that we find is something that we call the voice of the customer. This is where a business listens to its customer. And where do we find the voice of the customer? We find it in lots of places. We find it in email. We find it in call centers. We find it on the internet. And there is just a wealth of places where we find information about the voice of the customer. So, what happens to businesses that don't listen to the voice of the customer? Well, I looked on the internet the other day and I found some interesting businesses. Do you remember TWA Airlines? How about Eastern Airlines? How about Pan American Airlines? Maybe you might remember Woolworths or Sports Authority or Banana Republic or Howard Johnson's. There's a long list of corporations that once were profitable large corporations that no longer exist today. You can't find these corporations existing today. Actually, you can find Woolworths existing. I heard an interesting story about Woolworths the other day. Did you know that a gentleman named Sam Walton once started off as a clerk at Woolworths? And he tried to tell the people at Woolworths there is a better way to run their retailing business. And the people at Woolworths didn't listen to him. And so he went and formed something called Walmart. And so we don't have Woolworths today, but we have Walmart today, which is a successor of Woolworths. And so what happens to corporations that don't listen to the voice of the customer? They are going out of business. They may not know it, but they're going out of business. So there are a lot of places where we can hear the voice of the customer. Perhaps the most obvious place where we can hear the voice of the customer is in the call center. Most large corporations have something called a call center or an 800 number. So you can get on the 800 number and you can call up the corporation and you can have a conversation with a representative of a corporation. So what happens when you go to an executive and say to your executive, ma'am, sir, do you know what's going on in your call center? And executives always claim to know what's going on. Oh, yeah, we know what's going on in our call center. And they say, well, what's going on in your call center? Well, we get 700 calls a day, and the calls last for 4 minutes. And you say, well, that's interesting. Congratulations on knowing that information about your call center. But what are people saying? What is the conversation that is occurring? Are people complaining about something? Are people trying to buy something? Are people trying to install something? What are people saying in your call center? Don't you think, as a business, that it's important for you to know what people are saying in your call center? And the answer is, oh, that's kind of interesting. We hadn't thought about that. But you can't know what's going on in your call center. And that's the answer you get. Now, we're going to see in a few minutes that you can know what's going on in your call center. You want to be data driven? Let me tell you, the most important data that you have in your corporation is what people are saying to you. What about the internet? How many corporations have ever gone out to the internet to find out what people are saying about their products or their company? Now, I suppose that you know that you can go out to the internet and find out all kinds of things about your corporation and your products. But how many corporations actually go out there and look and see what people are saying? And I'm going to tell you, it's been my experience that most corporations don't have a clue as to what people are saying about them on the internet. But that's a really good place to find out what people are saying about your products, your services, the company, the attitude of people that work at the company. Listening to what's going on in the internet is a really, really smart thing to do if you want to hear the voice of your customer. Another interesting place where there's a lot of interesting, valuable text are medical records. I don't know if you know it, but when a medical record is written up about you and your experience with your doctor, it comes out in the form of text. Just like these conversations and just like things on the internet, everything is in the form of text. And now medical records are kind of important because they may be talking about you and saving your life. And I assume you're interested in saving your life. So there's a lot of really valuable information on medical records. Let me go off onto a quick tangent here. The other day, I was at my doctor, and my doctor's office. My doctor asked me, "Bill, what do you do?" And I told him that we take text and turn text into a database. And he said, "Gee, that's an odd thing to do." And I turned to my doctor and I said to the doctor, I said, "Sir, when you have to go do research for a difficult case that you're working on, what do you do?" And he says, "Well, I go find some medical records and try to find out what other people have done and what's been successful." And I said, "And how do you do that?" And he says, "Well," he says, "I go and I find the records and I read the records." And I said, "Well, that's interesting." I said, "How many records have you ever read to do research for a patient?" And the doctor says, "I don't know, maybe at most 20 records." And I said, "How would you like in the same amount of time to be able to look at 1 million records? What outcome, what health results do you think is going to be better for your patient? Looking at 20 records or analyzing 1 million records?" And I said, "You cannot, as you're a smart doctor. Doctors have to be smart people, but as long as they have to manually read records, there's only so many they can read. Once you put that text of the record into the form of a database, then you can start to use the computer to do analysis, and a whole new world opens up to you." Another place that there's a lot of valuable information are warranty claims. For a manufacturer that's producing some kind of product, looking at the warranty claims is valuable. Why? Because the warranty claims tell you where in your manufacturing process you need to improve. So you see, whether it's the voice of the customer or medical records or warranty claims, text has got a tremendous amount of valuable information. Another place where we have information that's valuable are contracts. And what are contracts in the form of? They're in the form of text. Insurance claims, that's another. And the corporation is full of data that is valuable data to the corporation. And what are we doing with it? We're tossing it in the garbage can. You want to be a data-driven corporation, that's a very good thing to do. I think that's a great idea. But what data are you looking at? Are you looking at just your structured data, those transactions that are done over and over each day? Or are you listening to the voice of your customer? Are you looking at medical records? Are you looking at insurance claims? Are you looking at email? And if you're like most corporations, you're taking that very valuable data and throwing it away. And does this make sense? Does anybody else out there as think that this is as stupid as it really in fact is? And so I'm a big fan of being data driven because I've seen what it can do for a corporation. On the other hand, looking just at structured data is looking at a very small portion of what is valuable in the corporation. So you say, okay, Bill, thanks for telling me this. This all boils down to text. And you see, computers are not very good at handling text. Text has got a lot of problems. It's a very complex problem. Why is text so complex? Well, first off, different people say the same thing different ways. They mean the same thing, but they say it differently. That's one complicating factor. Another complicating factor is some people like to write emails that are 2 sentences long, and other people like to write emails that are 2 pages long. That the size of any given piece of text is very variable. Another thing that makes matters a bit more complex is slang. You have some people say certain things in parts of the United States one way, and the same thing in United States, the same thing to be said in another part of the United States differently. And so there's lots and lots of reasons why text does not fit well with the computer. Fortunately, we have technology today that allows us. Now, for the first time, we can take text, put it through technology called Textual Etl, and put that into a database. And once we take the text and put text into the form of a database, now we can start to do all kinds of analytical, magical things with it. And so we see that when we take a look at the data in our corporation, we've been looking at this structured data for years and years, and that's good. But now we can start to look at text, and in doing so, we can start to have a much broader vision of what it means to be data-driven. So what we've done is we have enlarged our map. That if we have a map of data-driven technology for structured data, the size of Texas, when we add textual data, now we've added Massachusetts and California and Oregon and Washington and Iowa and Indiana and all of the other states to the union. That by taking our structured data and adding textual data to it, it means that we can do data-driven analytics in a fashion that we've never been able to do before. And then you say, gee, Bill, let's get back to this picture that we looked at before. We looked at the volume of data that we had in these different environments, and we said that there's really not all that much volume in the structured world, and there's a big volume in the other parts of the world. Doesn't that mean that we should be getting business value out of the other parts of the world? And let me draw this little diagram here for you. It's a little bit deceptive because you see, when it comes to getting business value out of something, the structured data is full of business value. Textual data certainly has business value, as we've seen, but there's a lot of textual data that doesn't have business value. Let me give you a quick example. The other day, we did an analysis of a work stream of a company called Inmon. You may remember Inmon Corporation. They were down in Houston, Texas, and they were a company that was defrauding people of savings and investment. And they went out of business. And the government put them out of business. And part of what the government did was the government took the last 600,000 emails that went through Enron and put them out there for the public to look at. And if you don't believe me, you can go out to the internet, look up Enron, and find the last 600,000 emails that were going through Enron. So anyway, just for fun one day, we took a look at the emails that were going through Enron. And it was really kind of interesting because probably 40 to 50% of the emails going through Enron either were people telling jokes to somebody else, are talking about the local football team or the baseball team. That you looked at the what was going through the emails of Enron, and fully 50% of what was going through Enron had nothing to do with business. Now, there certainly were emails that did have to do with business, but there were a lot of emails there that didn't have it. And then you go off over to machine generated data, and you find out that in machine generated data, there's actually not very much of machine generated data that has great business value. There's many records that occur in machine generated information that don't have any great business value. So that's why we see that it's a little bit deceptive to look at the volume of data that we have in these different environments and say, shouldn't we be getting tremendous value out of machine generated information? Yes, there is business value in machine generated information, but proportionately not nearly as much as there is in other environments. So what happens when you start to include all the corporate data in your roadmap? Something interesting happens. Sales go up, revenues goes up, you start to get new customers, you got to keep the market share that you get, and people get promoted. This is what happens when you broaden your horizon for what we mean by data-driven and data-driven analytics. So that's the presentation I have for today in terms of understanding what we mean by data-driven analytics and looking strategically at the world of data and how we can use data going into the future. I hope that I have opened your eyes up to new possibilities and new opportunities that have occurred. I'm available for questions should anybody have any questions.
Yep, thank you so much, Bill. Well, we got a question, two questions from Samir. It's very nice question, important one. First one is, could you please elaborate a bit on Textual Etl?
Sure. Textual Etl is technology that allows you to read raw text and move the text into a standard database. You can move it into Oracle, SQL Server, Hadoop, DB2, Teradata. It doesn't matter which database you load it into. Once you've loaded it into there, you can then use technology such as Tableau, Qlik, Power BI, etc. for analysis. The text can come from anywhere. It can come from voice transcription. It can come from optical character recognition. It can come from a database. It can come from the internet. So we don't care. It can come. Right now, we work in 9 different languages. We work in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, Italian, and I'm thinking, and Dutch. We currently don't work in Arabic, Kanji, Mandarin, or the picture-based languages of the Orient, although we know that we can. Textual ETL is something that is very fast and very inexpensive. So, and I'm more than happy, if anybody's interested, you can look up our website on Forest Rim Technology, and you can read a lot more about it if that's of interest to you.
Oh, thank you, Bill. So actually it says a tool called Textual Etl as an ETL tool. There is a other question from Samir. What type of database are you using for textual data?
You can use any database. You can use SQL Server, you can use Oracle, you can use DB2, you can use Teradata, you can use Hadoop, you can use, there may be a database that you can't use, but I'm not aware of it. That Textual ETL works in all of those databases.
Okay. Then there is one more question, like two. So I'll read it loud. So how do you deal with ethics, laws, policies, and regulations, etc.? I think
I'm
it's when,
sorry.
yeah,
Can you repeat that question again
yeah,
for me?
sure, Bill. How do you deal with ethics, law, policies, and regulations?
Um, okay, that is a very complex question. The way that you typically deal with ethics, politics, and things like that. First off, can you deal with them? The answer is yes, of course you can. How do you deal with them? The techniques that we use are actually many. Okay, this is a very complex question, but I'm going to have to give you a complex answer. Textual ETL and dealing with text is like a symphony orchestra. If you have a symphony orchestra, you've got violins, cellos, pianos, drums, horns, a flute, and all kinds of instruments. What you need is a director sitting at the head of the orchestra that when it comes time for the violins to play, the director motions to the violins. When it comes time for the flutes to play, he motions to the flutes. So, because of the complexity of text, there is no one, pardon me, there's no one algorithm that's necessary that you can use. There's a whole series of algorithms, and textual ETL is like the symphony orchestra director, pardon me, that says, okay, now we do text this way, and then we do text this way. The last time that we counted, there were 67 different individual algorithms that are necessary for dealing with text. Let me give you just one example of what we mean by an algorithm dealing with text. In some cases, you have what's called proximity variables. A proximity variable is something whose meaning depends on the proximity of the words. For example, if I were to say to you the Dallas Cowboys, you would probably think of a football team in Dallas, Texas. However, if I were to talk to you about Dallas and the city, and then a day later talk to you about cowboys, you would think of men riding horses on the prairie chasing cattle. Is probably what you would think of. So the proximity of Dallas and Cowboys together means one thing, but if you separate them, it means something else. And so that's just one example of what we mean by having different algorithms for understanding the meaning of data. And the textual ETL contains all of those algorithms and knows when to use one algorithm and when to not use another algorithm. So the answer is, and I've kind of beaten around the bush. Can you deal with policy and directions and things like that? Yes, you can, but it is a complex answer.
Thank you, Bill. There is one more question somebody asked. Actually, I wanted to ask the same question because you are in this industry, in this field for long. So have your view on data changed throughout the many years in the data field? Do you see data differently today than the before?
To some extent, yes. If you look at the history of our profession, 20 years ago, all data was structured data. Then we started to have the internet, and suddenly we had people that could talk with each other over the internet. And then there's been a whole change in the perception of data. And the world is no longer a world in which I tell you, along that line, the machine data that we have, We have data scientists out there trying to make sense of machine data. So the whole concept of what we mean by data and what we can do with the data is something that is very much different today than it was 5 years ago and certainly 20 years ago.
Thank you so much, Bill. There is another question. I think you already touched upon that. Any thought on future of data?
Well, I think, I truly believe that the future of data is headed towards becoming data driven. I think corporations that it's kind of interesting. In my presentation, we had a whole list of corporations that have died. I remember when I was going to school many years ago, we had somebody called Howard Johnson's, and late at night after a party, we would all go to Howard Johnson's and have milkshake or whatever it was that we were drinking at the time. You can't. Howard Johnson's doesn't exist anymore, and corporations somehow think they're not going to go out of existence. But Eastern Airlines, TWA, Pan Am, Woolworths, Banana Republic, Howard Johnson's. There's a whole list of companies out there that indeed have gone out of business, and so the companies that become data driven and understand the full impact, the full strategic of a data driven impact, are the ones that are going to be living 20 and 30 years from now. And the ones that don't, in terms of the future, you show me a corporation that doesn't pay attention to its data, and they're going to join the list of Howard Johnson's and Eastern Airlines.
Well, Bill, thank you so much. We don't have any more questions. It was really great to have you in our session. It was great learning. Thank you so much for having with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.